Why did ancient humans paint deep inside dangerous caves? Imagine squeezing through a crack in solid rock so narrow that your shoulders scrape both sides at once. Behind you, daylight disappears. Ahead, there is only darkness. Complete, absolute darkness. The air grows colder. Every sound echoes back at you. One wrong step could send you tumbling into a hidden pit. And after crawling hundreds of meters into this underground maze, you finally stop. Not to hide, not to sleep, not to store food, but to paint. Some of humanity's oldest and most breathtaking works of art weren't created beneath the open sky. They were painted in places so deep and dangerous that reaching them today often requires climbing gear, ropes, or expert guides. Which raises a question that has puzzled archaeologists for generations. Why would people risk their lives simply to leave pictures where almost nobody would ever see them? Most people imagine prehistoric cave paintings as the ancient equivalent of decorating a living room. A tribe settles near a cave, lights a fire, and someone decides the walls could use a few bison. It seems like a reasonable assumption, except that's not where many of these paintings are. Some of the world's most famous cave art lies hundreds of meters from the entrance, hidden behind twisting tunnels, underground rivers, and chambers that receive no natural light whatsoever. This wasn't convenient. It wasn't practical. In many cases, it was incredibly dangerous. Take the famous Cave of Lascaux, or even more astonishing, Chauvet Cave, whose paintings are around 36,000 years old. Reaching some of these chambers requires navigating passages that would challenge modern explorers wearing helmets and carrying powerful LED lamps. Ancient humans had none of those luxuries. They relied on flickering stone lamps fueled by animal fat, torches that filled the air with smoke, and an intimate knowledge of caves that could become deadly if you lost your sense of direction. So, if these paintings weren't meant to decorate everyday life, what were they for? Here's where things become strange. For decades, archaeologists assumed these caves were simply ancient homes. Then they looked more carefully. There were remarkably few signs that people actually lived in the deepest chambers. No cooking fires, very little rubbish, few everyday tools. The evidence suggested something unexpected. People traveled into these caves for specific occasions and then left. Imagine hiking several kilometers through freezing wilderness, crawling underground for another hour, carrying burning torches, pigments, stone lamps, and perhaps even children. That isn't a casual afternoon activity. It's closer to making a pilgrimage. Modern humans still do something remarkably similar. People climb mountains, walk hundreds of kilometers along pilgrimage routes, or travel across continents to reach places they consider sacred. Often, the journey itself becomes part of the experience. Perhaps Ice Age people thought similarly. The deeper they traveled, the farther they left the ordinary world behind. Darkness has a curious psychological effect. Without sunlight, familiar landmarks disappear. Time becomes difficult to judge. Sounds become distorted. Even today, psychologists know prolonged darkness alters our perception and increases emotional intensity. The cave itself may have transformed ordinary people into participants in something extraordinary. But if the journey mattered, why choose caves in the first place? At first glance, a cave is just empty rock. But spend enough time underground, and it begins to feel surprisingly alive. Water drips like a slow heartbeat. Air whistles through narrow passages. Your torchlight causes walls to appear and disappear with every movement. Ancient artists didn't paint on smooth surfaces whenever possible. Quite the opposite. They deliberately chose bulges, cracks, and folds in the limestone. A rounded wall became the shoulder of a bison. A natural ridge formed the back of a horse. The rock wasn't just a canvas, it became part of the animal itself. This is one reason the paintings appear astonishingly lifelike even today. As flames flickered, shadows danced across the uneven surfaces. An immobile drawing suddenly appeared to breathe. Imagine standing there with nothing but a wavering torch. The animals wouldn't simply be visible, they would seem to move. It's an effect modern museums often struggle to recreate, despite sophisticated lighting. Some researchers believe prehistoric artists intentionally exploited this illusion, not because they were creating entertainment, but because movement suggested life. And if the cave walls appeared alive, perhaps they believed something else lived there too. Which leads us to one of archaeology's biggest debates. Scientists agree on one thing. Nobody knows exactly why the paintings were created, but one idea has fascinated researchers for over a century. Perhaps these caves were sacred places. Many indigenous cultures around the world view caves as entrances to another realm, a place where spirits, ancestors, or powerful forces reside. It's tempting to assume Ice Age people thought similarly, but this is where archaeologists urge caution. There is no written record, no surviving explanation, only clues. Some clues are certainly intriguing. Many paintings appear in chambers with remarkable acoustics. Clap your hands in certain locations and the echoes become surprisingly rich. Some researchers noticed that paintings often cluster in places where sound behaves unusually. Coincidence? Maybe, or perhaps sound itself played an important role in ceremonies. Picture dozens of people standing in complete darkness. A torch flickers. Someone begins chanting. The echoes bounce endlessly through stone corridors, while painted horses seem to emerge from the walls. It's difficult not to imagine the emotional impact. Even modern visitors often describe these spaces as deeply moving. And here's the surprising part. Some caves contain almost no paintings of dangerous predators attacking humans. Instead, they overwhelmingly celebrate large herbivores, horses, bison, aurochs, mammoths, and deer. That seems odd. If cave art were simply recording daily life, wouldn't terrifying encounters appear much more often? Instead, the artists were selective, which suggests they weren't merely documenting the world, they were communicating something much more meaningful. But what message were they trying to leave behind? That question takes us into one of the oldest relationships in human history, between people and animals. At first glance, these paintings look like an Ice Age wildlife guide. Bison, horses, mammoths, rhinos, deer. But look closer, and another mystery appears. Many of the animals painted most often weren't the ones people ate most often. That surprised archaeologists. For years, it seemed obvious that cave paintings were hunting manuals, perhaps a way to teach younger hunters where to aim or which animals to pursue. It's a compelling idea. The problem is, the evidence doesn't cooperate. At sites across Europe, archaeologists have compared the animal bones left behind in camps with the animals painted on cave walls. The two don't always match. In some regions, reindeer made up much of the human diet, yet they appear relatively rarely in the artwork. Meanwhile, majestic horses dominate many galleries, despite being hunted less frequently. If the paintings weren't a menu, they may have been symbols. Different animals could have represented seasons, clans, myths, or spiritual ideas that have long since vanished. Unfortunately, without written language, we can't simply ask the artists what they meant. It's rather like finding a modern football stadium 2,000 years from now. Future archaeologists might conclude that giant coloured scarves were essential clothing, and that people gathered weekly to chant at grass. Technically accurate, spectacularly incomplete. The deeper researchers look, the more they realize that Ice Age art probably carried layers of meaning invisible to us today. But the paintings themselves reveal another astonishing clue. Some weren't created all at once. They were added to over thousands of years, which means people kept returning to the same hidden places, generation after generation. Why? Here's where the story stretches beyond a single lifetime. Carbon dating has shown that certain caves were visited repeatedly over astonishing spans of time. Imagine returning to the same cathedral, not for decades, but for over 1,000 years. That's the scale we're talking about. In caves like Chauvet, some paintings may have been created thousands of years apart. Different artists, different generations, possibly even different cultures. Yet they chose the same underground chambers. That isn't random. Places become important because stories accumulate around them. Today, people still visit ancient temples, battlefields, memorials and monuments because of what happened there before they were born. Sacred places rarely begin as famous landmarks. They become sacred because each generation adds another layer of meaning. Perhaps these caves worked in exactly the same way. A young child might have entered the darkness carrying a torch beside an elder who had made the same journey decades earlier. The paintings weren't simply images, they were history, memory, identity. In many cases, artists even painted over older works without completely erasing them. Rather than replacing the past, they incorporated it. It's almost as if every generation wanted to continue a conversation that had already lasted centuries. But another discovery suggests these caves weren't visited by everyone. Some journeys may have been reserved for only a select few. Imagine reaching a narrow tunnel, barely wider than your chest. You crawl forward. The ceiling presses against your back. Your torch threatens to go out. Eventually, the passage opens into a chamber covered with magnificent paintings. Now imagine bringing an entire community through that route. It would be almost impossible. Many decorated chambers are simply too difficult to access. Some require crawling through passages only a few dozen centimeters high. Others involve climbing steep slopes or squeezing between jagged rocks. This has led some anthropologists to suggest that access itself may have been meaningful. Perhaps only experienced hunters entered, or respected elders, or spiritual leaders, or perhaps young people undertaking important rites of passage. We don't know, but we do know something remarkable. These artists weren't working in a rush. Chemical analysis of pigments shows they carefully prepared charcoal, iron-rich ochre, and manganese oxides, sometimes grinding and mixing colors with remarkable precision. They used brushes made from plant fibers, pads of moss, fingertips, and even blue pigment through hollow bones to create soft-edged hand stencils. Those famous handprints feel strangely personal. Thousands of years separate us from the people who made them. Yet, when you place your own hand against one today, the proportions are often almost identical. For a brief moment, prehistory doesn't feel distant at all. It feels human. And then, archaeologists discovered something even more unexpected. The caves weren't silent. They were designed by nature to perform. Scientists studying cave acoustics noticed a fascinating pattern. Many spectacular paintings appear where echoes are strongest. Not everywhere, but often enough to raise eyebrows. Strike two stones together, clap once, or sing. The sound ricochets around the chamber in ways impossible to experience outdoors. Some locations even produce echoes that seem to move around you. Imagine standing in darkness with only a flickering flame. The walls appear alive. The air vibrates with echoes. Painted horses seem to emerge from shifting shadows. Water drips in perfect rhythm. You aren't simply looking at art, you're inside an experience. Modern museums spend millions trying to immerse visitors with lighting, sound design, and projection mapping. Ice Age artists had geology. They turned an ordinary cave into something unforgettable. Whether these journeys were ceremonies, storytelling gatherings, initiation rituals, or something we've yet to imagine, one thing becomes increasingly clear. The paintings were only part of the event. The cave itself was the masterpiece. When most of us picture prehistoric people, we imagine survival, finding food, escaping predators, enduring another freezing winter. And yes, they did all of those things. But deep beneath mountains, by the light of flickering animal fat lamps, they also created beauty. Not because it made hunting easier, not because anyone paid them, and not because millions of tourists would one day queue to admire their work. They created art because something about being human demanded it. These caves remind us that our ancestors weren't simply trying to stay alive, they were searching for meaning. They asked questions they couldn't answer. They gathered in extraordinary places. They shared stories that echoed through generations. In many ways, they were doing exactly what we're doing now, trying to understand our place in a mysterious world. Perhaps that's why these paintings still feel so powerful. They aren't messages from an alien civilization. They're messages from people remarkably like us, separated by tens of thousands of years, yet connected by curiosity, imagination, and the irresistible urge to leave a mark that says, "We were here." If you enjoy exploring the mysteries that history still can't fully explain, from ancient civilizations and forgotten technologies to the incredible discoveries reshaping our understanding of the past, consider subscribing. Every week we'll uncover another question that seems impossible at first, until the evidence tells a very different story. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next mystery.